Ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 ya. Ah ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la. Ah ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la.
Shabbat Shalom. It is wonderful to gather together, together in our community this Shabbat evening to welcome Shabbat and to begin our Rabbi Dudley Weinberg Scholar in Residence weekend. We welcome you, Dr. Zola. We're so glad you are here. We will begin our service this evening with Havana Shira.
Havana Shira, Shira Hallelujah, Shira Hallelujah. 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 Havana Shira, Shira Hallelujah. Havana Shira, Shira Hallelujah. Havana Shira, Shira Hallelujah, 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 Shira Hallelujah.
As we continue now, because we are a later service this evening than we have done in a while, we are going to, as our regular Shabbat Eve services, we are going to begin or continue with kindling Shabbat candles and with Kiddush. And Gloria, are you ready for us to come over to your house?
Yes, if you will allow me to unmute. Come on along.
Thank you, Gloria.
Welcome to everyone. And it is so good to be here for the Shabbat. So I invite you all to take a breath. Welcome the Shekhinah as we light the lights. And Cantor will chant the blessing. We mark the beginning of the sacred time, Shabbat, the day of rest. We pause and remind ourselves of the best of all as I take off this thing in front of my screen, we pause and remind ourselves of the beauty of this world, of the loves that embrace us, of the blessings that fill us.
Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
May we be blessed with Shabbos joy.
Amen.
May we be blessed with Shabbat peace.
Amen.
May we be blessed with Shabbos light. And may the light shine for us and for all who would wish for a Shabbos for all.
Amen.
Six days you will work and achieve, but the seventh day is dedicated to the Eternal One, our God. With the fruit of the vine, our sweet symbol of joy, we celebrate this sacred day. We give thanks for life and its blessings, for work and for rest, for the opportunity to gain and the privilege to give, for home and friendship and love, and for all. May you all be blessed as we have the wine. Mine is right here. Let's go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'yahava u'v'ratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reshi ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim Kivanu v'acharta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshecha b'yahava u'v'ratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat.
Rabbi, I think you're muted.
I'm not muted. I was waiting. Oh, there we go. I begin with a prayer of gratitude for all that is holy in my life. God needs no words, no English or Hebrew, no semantics and no services, but I need them. Through prayer, I can sense my inner strength, my inner purpose, my inner joy, my capacity to love. As I reach upward in prayer, I sense these qualities in my Creator. To love God is to love each other, to work to make our lives better. To love God is to love the world God created and to work to perfect it. To love God is to love dreams of peace and joy that illumine all of us and to bring that vision to life.
לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה לקראת שבת לכו ונך כי מקור המרחה בראש מקדם נצוחה סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה התעוררי התעוררי כי באור קומי אורי 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 שיר דמרי כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה בואי ושלום עצרת בעלה גם בשמחה ובצהלה תוך אמוני עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה לך דודי לגרקלה פני שבת נקמלה.
Entrances to holiness are everywhere. The possibility of ascent is all the time, even at unlikely times and through unlikely places. There is no place on earth without the presence.
יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכנו ויומכנו חיידךו בית ישראל בעגלה בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעלם לעלמי עמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשם בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתם ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 barakhu et Adonai hamevorach.
Baruch Adonai hamevorach hamevorach leolam vaed hamevorach hamevorach leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, bechokma poteach she'arim, uvitvuna meshane itim, umachalif et hazmanim, umisader et hakochavim b'mishmeroteham barakia kirtzono. Borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. Uma'avir yom umevi layla, umavdil ben yom uven layla, Adonai tzvaot shemo. El chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim.
Ahavat תפארת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ויארך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, נגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמי. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך וכל נפשך וכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hearts marching together.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה ליענו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. ושמור בצאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. העמידנו שומרנו לחיים.
Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. אדוני, אדוני, שפתי תפתח, ופי יגיד, ופי יגיד תהילתך. אדוני, שפתי תפתח, ופי יגיד, ופי יגיד תהילתך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל, אלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו ביחווה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בגבורות ומידו מלך, מלך מביא ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer. Wherever we live, wherever we seek you, in this land, in Zion restored, in all lands, you are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence. Let our eyes behold your loving return to Zion. Blessed are you, Eternal, whose presence returns to Zion. Baruch atah Adonai, hamachazir shchinato l'tzion. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lehodot.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata umelech Adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'necha levarech et amecha Yisrael b'chol el v'chol shah b'shalomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Baruch atah Adonai hamivarech et amo Yisrael
We take a moment for quiet personal prayer and reflection.
שלום במרומה הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן. שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן ואמרו אמן ואמרו
In the week to come, among those couples who will celebrate their wedding anniversaries are Jane and John Butenhoff. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, bless this couple and any other couples on the anniversary of their wedding. May they reflect with deep gratitude upon the years that have passed. Many and varied have been their experiences since that moment. May they recall the joys that have sweetened their lives. May they be thankful for the strength that allowed them to weather the storms that shook them to their very roots. God, you have been with this couple through all their years together. So may you continue to bless them with your presence in the years to come. Let these be years of health and contentment, of unclouded happiness in the circle of family and loved ones, as we all say, Amen. As we continue with a prayer for healing, Mishaberach Avotenu v'Imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu Yivarech et HaCholim. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are ill. Elliot Applebaum, Marcy Berman, Blake Bold, Vivian Borkan, Marty Brand, Joel Bradley, Colin Campbell, Lisa Carroll, Mackenzie Clyde, Caleb Colabroy, Rabbi Stanley Davids, Risa Davids, Miriam Davis, Roman Draba, Harav Ilana Miriam Bat Chana, Douglas Duval, Helen Eglash, Rebecca Ensler, Esther Bat Sarah Uvinyamin, Louis Ferris, Susie Fono, Irv Gaines, Peter Gilbert, Carol Goldstein, Leah Bat-Heki Mordechai, Scott Grant, Michael Greenfield, Leah Halpern, Sam Hanna, Beth Gobich Harris, Steve Hershenson, James Hilgendorf, Jen Carlin, Louise Sandler Kaufman, Yaakov Ben Malka V'Yisrael, Susie Kay, Rana Kimmel, Jenny Kingsbury, Laverne Colton, Seymour Colton, Herman Cron, Sheila Lentz Cron, Terry Beth Krasnow, Ed Knox, Steve Crelly, Eli Levin, Lori Lincoln, Paul Lysius, Steve Laduha, Shoshana Batsosia, Asuncion Madrigal, Richard Stewart Margolis, Clarence McFall, Bobby Mendelson, Chelsea Minkoff, Vicki Mullen, Charlene Muse, Gail Sassner-Peterson, Kathy Polzine, Kelly Powell, Dave Rasmussen, Brian Quirk, Rita Resnick, Werner Rickheimer, Kim Rice, Jill Robinson, Lieb Batfrido Fessach, Pam Sanfilippo, Yael Batsarava Avraham, Zelma Schloss, Gabriella Schwartz, Ruben Siegert, Ruth Bat Irene Avraham, Fred Stein, Susie Gigi Stein, Leah Etta Batstisha, Cindy Schwartz, Jeannie Vergaitis, Harav Chaim Ben Rachel Leah Vitzvia Kohen, Beryl Ben Lazer, Chana Bat Chaim, Rachel Bat Esther Vishmuel, Giora Ben Sara Visvi, Shlomit Bat Tami, Harav Ora Bat Leah V'Yakov, Bat Sheva Bat Sarah Avraham, Reese Bat Bela Gittel, Sarah Rachel Bat Yocheved Alexander Moshe, Nadiva Zayit Bat Ilana Uvinyamin Ber, Beryl Ben Lazar V'Miriam, Adina Yael Bat Shoshana, Sarah Rachel Bat Yocheved, Leah Bat Chana V'Kalman Gershon, and Phil Himmelfarb. If there are others that you are thinking of this evening, please raise your hands so that we can unmute you and call on you to share their names.
Reading.
Michelle Thorman,
Margie.
Excuse me, my sister Laura Weiss Stanoff,
Bruce. Oh,
Jack Keys,
Jim.
John and Melinda Collins and Greg Stefanski.
I also want to add the name Bob Engelberger. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of spirit and of body. May God grant wisdom and insight to those who bring healing. May God grant courage and comfort to those whose struggles continue. As we all say, Amen. We continue with Misha Berach together.
Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misheberach imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
In this week's Torah portion, Terumah, the Israelites are instructed regarding the tabernacle, not only to make it functional, but also to make it beautiful. They receive instructions on building it and on decorating it, with those instructions intertwined. To quote from the text, "As for the tabernacle, make it of 10 strips of cloth. Make these of fine twisted linen, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, with a design of cherubim worked into them. The length of each cloth shall be 28 cubits, and the width of each cloth shall be 4 cubits. All the cloths to have the same measurements. 5 of the cloths shall be joined to one another, and the other 5 cloths shall be joined to one another. Make loops of blue wool on the edge of the outermost cloth of one set, and do likewise on the edge of the outermost cloth of the other set. And so it continues. And I think of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives in a similar way. It is, according to their website, the world's largest freestanding research center dedicated solely to the study of the American Jewish experience. It is also a building with beautiful rooms, incredible relationships with individuals and organizations across the country, and so much heart on the Cincinnati campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. At the helm of the American Jewish Archives since 1998 has been its executive director, Dr. Gary Zola, who also edits the center's biannual academic publication, the American Jewish Archives Journal. Dr. Zola is also a professor at HUC, teaching now decades of rabbinical students, including this one when she was a rabbinical student, about American Jewish history. In 2011, he was appointed by President Obama to the Commission for the Preservation of American Heritage Abroad. And in 2006, he was appointed to the Academic Advisory Council of the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission. Under his care, the American Jewish Archives has tripled in size and continued to expand its collection. We are so lucky to have him here with us this weekend. Tonight, we are so much looking forward to learning more about profiles in American Jewish courage. Dr. Zola, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I think some in this Zoom room know that I'm no stranger to your neck of the woods, even though now I've been down in Cincinnati for the majority of my life. I was raised in Evanston, Illinois, and I've been spending summers in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, ever since I was 10 years old, and had many, many friends and teachers and rabbis from Madison and from Milwaukee. In fact, I'm showing my age. I actually have been in your congregation's earlier building. So that's how far back I go. Now, I know we all have to watch our time when we're on Zoom, so we don't get Zoom fatigue. But I hope you'll allow me just 2 minutes before I begin, because like any good rabbi, before I speak, I have something to say. And I want to begin really by saying, first of all, how very honored I am to be with your congregation, your historic congregation. In my whole career, this is really the first time I've ever had the opportunity to teach at Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurun, and so I'm very happy to be here for that reason. I want to thank my friend of long standing, Susan Cosbin, who has represented you in terms of making arrangements and making sure that everything worked, and appreciate that very much. And of course, I want to, again, in front of everybody, thank the cantor for leading a beautiful service tonight, and also for singing happy birthday to me a few days ago in the most beautiful rendition that I've heard in a long time. And Rabbi Baralski, she is, Jessica was certainly a student who I remember, and I loved your introduction, Jessica, because it's so good to see a loving graduate of the historic Cincinnati campus. And finally, even though he's on Shabbaton, on sabbatical, Rabbi Berkson, who has been my friend, he preceded me in the rabbinate. He's ahead of me, and we have been friends really in the entirety of our careers. So I want to just say one word before I begin, one more word, and that is, you know, I've been my whole life. I haven't been a pulpitating rabbi. I've been institutionalized, And the institution where I've been kept is the institution that helps to provide us with our leaders, our rabbis and our cantors and our educators and our communal leaders. And this was the great, great idea of the founder of the college, Dr. Isaac Mayer Wise, the great rabbi of the 19th century. And before I actually begin my little presentation, I just want us all to be mindful, especially during this circumstances that we all have faced the last year, how very important it is to have Klei Kodesh, to have our religious leaders who teach us. It really is, this is not false modesty. It's easy for a guy like me to come in and talk to you about something that I've studied day in and day out. As you heard from the rabbi, for heaven's sakes, all the material I need to write is right outside of my office, and people bring it to me. I mean, it's all so easy in comparison to the work that your religious leaders do, because I'm here for the weekend teaching what's familiar to me, but they have to be here with you week in and week out, teaching you something new, providing new material. You cannot get up and give a modification of the same talk if you're the rabbi or the cantor or the educator week in and week out. You just can't do that. And so there are heroes. And I think we have seen in American Jewish life the heroism of our religious leaders throughout this year. I've been usually I would be with you in person for this weekend, right? And now I'm doing the same thing that we're all trying to do, and I'm doing it this way. But when I see the work that my colleagues have done, and trying to keep the best we can our people going, I really pay tribute to Isaac Wise, who had that dream, and our school and the people who go out and serve. They are really and truly the secret of our endurance in American Jewish life. Now, I am going to, having said that, I'm now going to share a screen, and I know you'll all get used to it. So let me, let's see here. So let's see. Okay, so now it looks like something has frozen.
It appears that Dr. Zola, I think, got bumped off, and I'm going to assume that he's going to do his best to be back on in a moment. This is how the technology goes sometimes. It works really, really well right up until the moment when it doesn't.
Maybe a little nigun while we're waiting.
Thank you.
Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la ya la 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 ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la la. Bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum. Ya la ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la.
All right, we are going to continue again in one moment. I see that he is coming in and settling back into our sanctuary, so to speak. Welcome back, Dr. Zola. We're glad you came back to us. But you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. You know, friends, I don't know. I can't tell you what just happened. I went to start my share screen, and I'm going to try this one more time. And if that does not work, then I'm just going to quit. I won't try it again. If that should happen again, I'll do without the share screen. I hope this works. Now let's see if this will work. Okay, are you all able to see the beautiful campus of the Hebrew Union College?
Yes.
You know, friends, I see there's people who will know that this is the truth. You know, during World War II, when anything went wrong with airplanes, they would blame it on gremlins. So we need a name for something that does that to our computers, because all of a sudden, for some reason, everything just froze. I've never had that happen in all the 11 months. But so let's begin. Now, I know you all, or many of you will for sure know this man, Milton Berle. And he used to tell a story that I liked, and that is he would say that when he went to a town and would make his appearances, he would go to the local senior center where he would donate his time and volunteer to try to cheer people up. And he told a story that one time he went into the lobby, the main lobby, and he was shaking hands with people. And as he approaches all the people, he's smiling and saying hello. And he comes over to a particular woman and he spots her off to the side. She seems like she's not paying attention at this senior center. She seems off in her own world. And he's determined to bring her some cheer. So he goes right up to her with that great big Milton Berle smile that he had. And he sticks his hand out and he says, "Hello, ma'am. You know who I am, don't you?" And immediately, Berle would say, as soon as he said that, her face lit up and she had a big smile on her face. And she looked at him and she said, "Now, you young man, don't you worry about a thing. If you don't know who you are, you go right over to that lady behind the desk and she will be happy to remind you." So that's my opening yarn to introduce what is actually a rather serious and important subject, and that is the subject or the topic of the history of Jewish life in America. How little it is that we know about the American Jewish experience, the legacy, which is really truly fascinating and remarkable, and it's an inheritance which to which we all ought to take a great deal of pride. Now, this evening, as you know, I'm talking about profiles in American Jewish courage, and you will see that this legacy of the American Jewish experience is also important to the history of Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurun. It is part of the warp and the woof your congregation is of the American Jewish experience, and I'd like to try to demonstrate that this evening. Now, in looking at our historical legacy, we realize how important it is to know our past, because the truth is that if we know our past, the past serves in the same capacity as that lady behind the desk. She, the past, reminds us of who we are. So now this evening, I want to consider briefly three case studies of individuals who are profiles in courage, in American Jewish courage. And although the three case studies I'm going to mention don't have any direct association with your congregation or even Milwaukee, I am going to try to tie them to the history of your congregation. And I want to try to demonstrate through these case studies that the important parts of the American Jewish experience and how this congregation, your congregation, also illustrates these qualities and these characteristics that should reinforce for us the important lessons that come from our collective past. So let's begin with our first profile. This is a woman by the name of Penina Moise. Moise was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1797, and she died there in 1880. So she lived a long life. And if you recognize Moise's name, there may be some in this congregation that do, because she actually wrote hymns and essays and liturgical poetry for her congregation in Charleston, South Carolina. And in fact, many of her hymns made their way eventually into the Union hymnal. And these hymns were sung in the American Reformed Synagogue right up to the middle of the 20th century. Now, Penina Moise was a very reverent woman, and she reveled in the life of the mind. She loved to read and write, and actually she made her livelihood running a private educational academy with the help of her sister. In Charleston, Moise was a pioneering stalwart of the congregation's Sunday school, and generations of young Charlestonian Jews experienced her as a teacher, and they learned from her piety, love of spiritual life, love of coming together in community, and the inner emotional dimensions of Judaism. Now, Moise began to lose her eyesight as she approached her mid-40s. And by the time Penina Moise reached 50, she was completely blind. I suppose there would be many people who would throw in the towel, who would say, I can't teach, I can't write, I can't do what I had been doing. But Moise doggedly continued, somehow with the help of her relatives and her students, to continue to write and to teach and to contribute to the spiritual life of her synagogue, Kahal Kadosh Beth Elohim in Charleston. And she composed, as I said, liturgy, hymns, verses, clever rhymes throughout the whole course of her long life. And these reflected her love of life, her love of Jewish life, and her all-encompassing devotion to her Jewish heritage. She was devout, committed to her congregation. And when the frailty of age began to prevent Penina Moise from going into her building, the congregation's building, she stayed at home and worshiped just like we're doing, and she remained a profile in piety. In fact, the story is told by the documents that on Sabbath and on the holy days, her former students who loved her so much, and they were now young adults, would actually take turns going to her home and reading the prayer service to her, to their sightless teacher, because there was no way for them to unite electronically in those days as we are doing this evening. And then there's such a remarkable story from this period in her life, which I'm showing you. Archival documents actually say that she was so revered for her spirituality, her Jewish soul, that when little baby girls were born, their parents would bring those children to Penina Moise's home, and they would set those children down in her lap in the hope that the physical contact of these little babies would somehow, through osmosis, acquire this woman's remarkable creativity, her determination to persevere, her loyalty to Jewish life, and her determination to sustain community through congregation. Now, in 1894, on the silver anniversary of Emmanuel's founding, long before it became Emmanuel B'nai Jeshurun, this man, who was the rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Moses, was the first editor of the Union Prayer Book in the 1890s. And in his celebratory speech at the congregation, that is Emmanuel, on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of its founding, he wrote a sermon which still survives. And in this sermon, he, Rabbi Moses, took note of the pious and dedicated women of your congregation who contributed, said Moses, to the upbuilding of the congregation. He makes mention specifically on this occasion of the Ladies' Relief Sewing Society and of the Sisterhood of Emmanuel for Personal Service and of the Ladies' Emmanuel Society, all of which he said promoted the cause of true charity. And look at what he said specifically on that occasion. Let our mothers, our wives, our sisters, and our daughters have equal rights and equal duties with the men of Israel, and they will make the synagogue a center of holy influence, a focus of social reforms, a sanctuary of the ideal life. Now, our second profile this evening is that of this man, Rabbi Maximilian Heller. He eventually became known as Max Heller and loved to tell his congregants that he was the only rabbi who dropped a million. Now, Rabbi Heller was a graduate of the Hebrew Union College, and he was in the second class. He was ordained in 1884. He was a student of Isaac Mayer Wise, a committed reformer, a dedicated minister, a learned scholar, and he spent almost his entire career in New Orleans, Louisiana. But then in the year 1900, Rabbi Heller's career took a rather unique and unexpected turn when, at the dawn of the 20th century, he announced through a magazine that he had become a political Zionist, a follower of Theodor Herzl. Now, Heller writes in this article, which I'm showing you, that he had assessed the virulence of anti-Semitism in practically every corner of continental Europe. 3 decades, he did this 3 decades before the feral Nazi menace would obliterate 6 million of our brothers and sisters and our children. And here in the year 1901, Heller concludes that Herzl's idea, Herzl's vision for the Jewish people living in their ancient homeland would be, and I quote, Judaism's salvation. The only hope, he wrote, for our survival. By 1907, Rabbi Heller was the honorary vice president of the Zionist Organization of America, which was called in those days the Federation of American Zionists. And at the same time, he was the vice president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. And it had always been the custom from the days of Isaac Mayer Wise that the vice president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis would become the president at the end of a 2-year term. And so it was expected that Rabbi Heller would succeed to the presidency. However, many of the Reform rabbis felt at the time that his political Zionism made him ineligible to become the president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis because the majority of his colleagues did not agree with his politics. Well, shortly before the election was to take place, Heller's friends urged him to make compromise, to make concessions. Tell your colleagues, they said, that if they elect you, you promise you will refrain ever from speaking about Zionism in public. And in that way, you'll be elected. And Rabbi Heller refused. And we know he refused because he did so in writing. He said to his friends in a letter, I am too great a lover of freedom of speech and fairness to do that sort of cringing. He declared, the future of the Jewish people depended upon the ability of men and women to speak freely about the needs of the present and to make their case on the basis of their convictions for the future. Heller insisted on staying the course, regardless of the consequences. And in the letter, he says, should I be defeated, I will owe no one a grudge. I shall continue to work with and for the conference. The cause cannot help it if the men are weak. I shall have no regrets, he wrote. I've done my duty as best I know how. Well, courage of conviction does not always bring us to a happy conclusion, does it? But I am able to tell you that somehow Rabbi Heller overcame his opposition, and in 1909 he did become the president of the sixth president of the CCAR. Now, from 1951 to 1955, one of the 20th century's most prominent rabbinic Zionists occupied the pulpit of your congregation. And although Rabbi Heller had died almost 30 years prior to 1953, he lived long enough to dream about the reality of a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. And 52 years later, in the year 1953, on the 5th anniversary of Israel's independence, Rabbi Herbert Friedman, the rabbi of your congregation, spoke with Presbyterians about what Israel would one day mean to America and to American Jewry. Israel was a state for 5 years when the rabbi told the congregation these words: "We, as Jews, will appreciate Israel's destiny as we watch it unfold, for it shall nourish us someday as we now are nourishing its struggling pioneers. This symbiotic brotherhood, unbreakable, comes down from many millennia of common hope. This partnership will go forward into many millennia in the future, in which Israel and America will go side by side as freedom-loving, democratic nations with the same objective of world peace. And the two Jewries in these two countries will live side by side as free and equal citizens, proud of the nations whose citizenship they bear, and loving each other in a relationship of brotherhood. I pray that this will be the will of God." Now, this evening, we have time just to consider one additional example. Rabbi Perry Nussbaum is the man you're looking at. Nussbaum is a graduate also of the Hebrew Union College in the class of 1933. And by all accounts, Rabbi Nussbaum was what you would say the opposite of an Irenic spiritual leader. In fact, his prickly and blunt personality transformed him into something of what I would call a wandering Jew, because during the first 25 years of his rabbinate, he served, seven different congregations: Melbourne, Australia; Amarillo, Texas; Pueblo, Colorado; Wichita, Kansas; Trenton, New Jersey; Long Beach, New York; and Pittsfield, Massachusetts. In fact, Rabbi Nussbaum described his pulpit experiences rather wryly. He paraphrased the famous line from Julius Caesar, that maxim we've all heard. He said, "I came, I saw, I failed." Well, after 25 years of peregrinations, Nussbaum was encouraged by a colleague to apply for a recently vacated pulpit in none other than quiet, comfortable Jackson, Mississippi, a place where, as his colleague told him, "Perry, go down, try out for that pulpit. They only have Friday night services. They barely have a religious school. You'll enjoy the congregation. There'll be peace and quiet, and you'll be sipping mint juleps for the rest of your life." Well, Nussbaum arrives in that town in the summer of 1954, only a few months after the day that occurred that was known by Southerners as Black Monday. That is May the 17th, 1954, the day that the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Brown versus Board of Education that racial segregation in the public schools was now unconstitutional. Now, Nussbaum was a Northerner. He was raised in Canada, in fact. And Nussbaum aspired to be an advocate for the ideals of prophetic Judaism. Because his Reform upbringing, his studies at the Hebrew Union College, compelled him to defend the ideals of the prophets, the ideals of Amos, of Micah, of Isaiah. And yet in the South, in the Deep South, many of his congregants feared the rabbi's prophetic teachings. They feared reprisals in their businesses and in their social circle. And they understood and saw that the atmosphere was tense and even very violent. And so when the Freedom Riders began to arrive in Jackson, Mississippi in the 60s, they would, of course, be immediately incarcerated in Parchman Prison. It was Perry Nussbaum who would drive from Jackson 130 miles to Parchman and 130 miles back each and every Thursday to visit the Jewish Freedom Riders who were in that penitentiary ministering to these young people. Now, Nussbaum was committed to working for equality, and he is the founder of the first integrated ministerial association in the South that took place in Jackson, and that held its monthly meetings in rotation. In every minister, they would invite the other ministers into their houses of worship, and that meant that white ministers would go into black churches and black ministers would go into the synagogue as well as white churches. And this was not easy to do. He insisted that Beth Israel of Jackson take its turn to host the ministerial association. And eventually that came with a price, because on September 18th, 1967, as many will remember, a bomb was set off at Beth Israel in Jackson at the newly dedicated building. And then 2 months later, almost to the day, again in the year 1967, 2 months later, the rabbi's home was bombed in the evening while the rabbi was in his home. And as you can see, it is almost miraculous that he and his wife managed to survive that attack. Now, some in the community had sympathy for the rabbi's traumas, but there were others, of course, who told Rabbi Nussbaum that he had brought these calamities upon the congregation and upon himself. I'd like to tell you that Nussbaum accepted his fate with equanimity. As you probably guessed already, he did not. He was rueful about the way he was treated. He would frequently grouse that neither the union, nor the college, nor the conference stood by him and supported him during those struggles. And yet he never wavered from his commitment to doing what he considered morally correct. And in the pages of the CCAR Journal, he wrote an article about his experiences, and he wrote these words which you see in front of you. He said, "History will testify, and so will some of his contemporaries on the inside of things, he hopes, and those who will use the American Jewish archives, that they'll reveal after he has gone to the Yeshiva Shel Mala, the academy on high, that at no time did this rabbi fail to rise to the challenges of those years within and without the congregation. Now, a contemporary of Rabbi Nussbaum, Rabbi Dudley Weinberg, stood in front of your congregation in 1956, very irked by the tone of the mayoral campaign that was going on in that year, and that one candidate accused another candidate of having too close an association with the Negroes of Milwaukee. And so Rabbi Weinberg, contemporary of Rabbi Nussbaum, posed this question in a sermon to your congregation. The question was simple. It was, can the Negro achieve equality in America? And this is what your rabbi taught. The Negro must enjoy equality. There can be no ifs, ands, or buts about the matter. And if anybody knows it, we Jews ought to know it. Shall we say it cannot be done in the United States of America? It can be done with patience and wisdom, with faith and the power of God's love to inspire his creatures, man, to love his fellow man. It will be done. Amen. So, friends, in just a few days, we will be celebrating the holiday of Purim. And it has been noted frequently that acculturated, assimilated American Jews can readily identify with the story of Esther, who was, after all, herself an assimilated Jew who became the queen of Persia. And Esther could have easily abandoned her people and blended in to the larger culture. But as her cousin, Uncle Mordecai, or cousin Mordecai, admonished her, he taught her with these unforgettable words. He said, think not that because you are in the king's palace, that you shall escape. For if you remain silent, then revach v'hatzlacha ya'amod laYehudim mikom acher. Then relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from someone else. Never write off assimilated, acculturated Jews, Rabbi Irving Greenberg wrote, because they always come out of the historical closet in the greatest crises and when we least expect it. Never write off American Jewry. There have always been profiles of courage, people who are determined to recall the greatness of our heritage and to keep it and transmit it to another generation. As we read and will recite in a few days, who knows ever whether he or she has not come into the kingdom for just such a time as this. Friends, I'll leave you with this thought. It was the very brilliant German writer and philosopher Goethe who put some remarkable words in the mouth of his melancholy hero Faust. In that book, in that play, Faust says these words: what you have inherited from your forebears, you really cannot call your own unless you earn it for yourself. The quote is, what you have inherited from your forebears, you must earn for yourself before you can really call it your own. Once we really and truly learn this admonition and we internalize it, we cannot help but to acknowledge that for many years now, when others, that in many years to come, when others will come and take our place and we will be part of the past, there will be people, our posterity, who will be going to the American Jewish Archives, and they will be assessing our generation. So let's resolve on this Sabbath and over this weekend when we study the American Jewish past, let's resolve to internalize one of the great touchstones of our sacred writings, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Let our days be worthy of the days of our heritage. And it's probably the case that no one said it more beautifully and more succinctly than the first prime minister of the state of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, who said in a different circumstances and in a different context, something that applies very much to the message I want to leave you with. Ben-Gurion said, "We Jews must never live in the past, but the past must certainly live within us." Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, Dr. Zola, for all of your words, for all of this wisdom this evening. When we're just about at the end of the service tonight, we will have a few minutes for questions. I also want to remind everybody, as we'll hear more in the announcements, that Dr. Zola is with us teaching several more times over the course of the weekend. So I'm going to, as you think of your questions over the next few minutes, keep them to tonight's topic, and then come back after tonight, and your other questions on different topics will very likely be answered. And if not, you'll have more chances to ask them after tonight as well. So we're going to continue our service now with Aleinu, which will be in a moment on the screen in front of you.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו גדולי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומושביתו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו וזולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת יום וחשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד.
Let the time not be distant, O God, when all shall turn to you in love, when corruption and evil shall give way to integrity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the mind, nor idolatry blind the eye. O may all created in your image become one in spirit and one in friendship, forever united in your service. Then shall your realm be established on earth and the word of your prophet fulfilled. The eternal will reign forever and ever.
ונאמר היה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Our thoughts turn now to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death, as we take a moment now to remember. As the names of your dear ones are mentioned, we invite you to rise in loving memory as we remember the relatives and friends of our congregation who have gone before us into life eternal. Tonight we remember Dorothy A. Spangenberg, Floyd Levy, and Susan Brashears Bay, who were laid to rest recently. We also remember David Ackerman, Stuart Altschuler, Florence Apter, Solomon Benish, Samuel Brenner, Daniel Martin Borkan, Ronnie Beth Bush, Nell Chernoff, William Chorney, Jenny Chortek, Rita Cohen, Norman Dichter, Rebecca M. Dubinsky-Schenker, Sophie Fernandez, Stephen M. Fine, Gerald Fishman, Eugene Friedman, Lena Dwoskin, Hattie Freudenfeld, Celia Friedlander, Leo Goldman, Frank Goldstein, Clara Machlis Gross, Alexander Grossman, Sidney S. Hack, Beatrice Harkavy, Harry Hecht, Armin Ian Horwitz, Harvey H. Horwitz, Howard Karras, Jack Kobrick, Jacqueline L. Kravitz, Rosalind Leader, Helen Sarah Lieb, Caroline Lesser, Lou Max Levinson, Jenny Zitron Levin, Flora Levy, Rachel Levy, Irving Marcus, Robert Marks, Hyman Meyer, Wendy E. Minacci, Lillian Cecile Mazer, Betty Lou Muchin, Ira S. Newman, Carol Zelda Pinchard, J. Vern Resick, Shirley Ross, Louis H. Rotter, Janice Salzman, Bernard Jerome Sampson, Mary Sachs, Lillian Shuckett, Alan Schlimovitz, Bessie Snap, Oliver Steiner, Archie H. Tax, Aaron Ugent, Jacob Yusso, and Charles B. Zitron, whose anniversary of death is remembered tonight. If there are others that you are remembering, please raise your hands so that you can share their name with us.
Michael,
David Levin.
We also remember those who perished in the Shoah who have no yahrzeit dates. We pray, may their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May their repose be peace. Zichronam livracha, may all of their memories be for a blessing. As we now ask the congregation to join with those who mourn in the words of Kaddish, and if you would like to either unmute yourself or keep yourself unmuted, we will all join together in the words of Kaddish. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Rabbi, Ne'elma, Divrach, Yameh, Yamlich, Malchut, Chayachon, Yomechon, Hayeh, B'chol Beit Yisrael, Gad Elau, V'Yisrael, Yivru, Hey Shmei Rabba Mevarach, Lamei Almaya, Yitzrach,
Your laptop.
Yitzar, Yivroman,
Your iPad.
V'Yitzhadar, Mela min kol birchat Yisrael, Tushbachah Amiran Me'alma V'Yimru Amen. Yehei Shalom Rabba Mitzrayim, Hayim Israel, Imru Amen. Shalom Livromam, Luya Asim Shalom, Leinu Ve'al Imru Amen. May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say,
Amen.
as we will continue now. Before we close the service officially, I would like to turn back to Dr. Zola for those who have questions about tonight's presentation. Like I said, there will be many chances after tonight as well. So if you have questions about this evening's talk presentation, please raise your hands and we will try and get to as many as we can in a few minutes.
Carol? If you'll unmute yourself, Carol. We can come back to you. Does anyone else have a question while we work with Carol's muting? George?
Would you like to comment about Henrietta Zoll's father, who, as I understand, was a Reformed rabbi in Baltimore, who was also one of the early supporters of the emancipation movement? So would you like to comment about that, please?
Well, absolutely. You're right. Rabbi Benjamin Zold was his name, from Baltimore. And, you're talking now about a period before what we would call the organized reform movement as we know it today, which we typically date the beginning of the reform movement to the year 1885, because that's when the Pittsburgh Platform was promulgated. And it was at that time that platform is the platform that was what we might call the lightning rod that split the reformists into two groups. On the one hand, you had the more radical or liberal reformers, and on the other hand, you had the more traditional. For about 35 or 40 years, from at least the 1830s and 40s until 1885, whatever that would be, these people existed together and they worked together. They didn't always get along, but there was a unity, and they were working largely in those days towards American Judaism. But and that was what was the case when Isaac Mayer Wise established the Union and established the Hebrew Union College. How do I know I'm right about that? The reason is because in the name, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the Hebrew Union College, that was what he was after. He was after keeping everyone together. After the 1885 platform, that fell apart. And the Hebrew Union College and the Union became, if you will, the home of the more liberal end of those people. And the more traditionalists would ultimately unify in what we call the conservative movement. Rabbi Zold was in that more traditional camp. And he actually did some teaching at the Jewish Theological Seminary when it was established. And yes, he was a Zionist, and many who, meaning he continued to keep those words in the prayers and so forth. When I said that Rabbi Heller was the first Zionist, I want to stress I said he was the first. If I didn't say it, I should have. He is the first graduate of the Cincinnati School, at the Hebrew Union College, to be publicly declare himself a political Zionist. And of course, there were many others that followed him, right? Abba Hillel Silver and several others. But for many years, the students followed Isaac Mayer Wise's opposition to any talk about Zionism. I hope that answered your question. Did it? Okay. All right. Dr. Marcus would have said that was a great question, George, because I know the answer. Any other questions? Did we get the mute problem fixed?
We did. Carol
Good, good. And I feel badly that this happened because, I'm sure there would have been throngs of questions if Zola's computer hadn't frozen. But okay, we'll do the best we can. Carol, you go. I still can't hear her, Carol. Can anybody hear her?
No, but she's not muted, so it might be a microphone problem, Carol. So sorry.
Carol, could you put your question in the chat, even if we can't hear you say it?
I chatted to you, Carol. I'm not sure if you see it and see where to type.
So how did the slides come across? Was everybody able to, normally on the pulpit, I normally don't use slides, but I figured, well, we're all electronic, might as well give it a try. Rabbi Borolsky will tell you that I always used to use illuminations when I teach. I usually don't just carry on. Well, I may carry on, but I have illustrations as I carry on. So.
Yes, the idea of you doing this without slides in a sanctuary doesn't really compute for me because, yeah, I'm only used to hearing you speak with a big screen and lots of pictures and documents.
So okay, if there are no other questions, then we should adjourn for Shabbat Menucha, for Sabbath rest. And I look forward to being with you tomorrow twice. I have some very interesting material for you. And then, of course, on Sunday, I'm looking forward to it. It's an honor to be, when I was a young boy in Evanston, Illinois, growing up, and I'd go to camp. Of course, everybody knew about Rabbi Weinberg. And so it's really a big honor for me, having of course, only seen him from afar. I was a kid at the time, but to speak in a study program that's in his memory. So thank you very much for your gracious invitation.
Thank you so much. And we are going to finish this up. Let's, if you would put our announcements up, Andrew, so that we can. Rini, do you want to share them or you want me to just keep going? Let's see.
Try now.
I said, Rabbi, you can keep going. That will be
okay.
Just fine.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Rini. So we want to thank tonight's Bima Basket sponsors, Linda and Eli Frank, in honor of, I guess, our staff for last week's speaker specifically, and in honor of Linda's birthday, and Sandy Rusink in memory of her mother, Shirley Ross. We have, as Dr. Zola mentioned, we have lots more learning to do still this weekend. We will continue our Rabbi Dudley Weinberg Memorial Scholar in Residence weekend. Tomorrow morning, study minyan begins at 9 o'clock. We will have our service first at 9 o'clock, and then we will study what an American Hebraist can teach us about Song of Songs, reflections on Gershon Rosenzweig. And then we will take a short break for Kiddush and stretching, and then we will continue at 11:15, documents from the American Jewish Archives. And then we will also come back together on Sunday at 12:30 for American Exceptionalism, Past, Present, and Future. So please come join us for as many of those as you are available. In between all of that, we have our Havdalah together Saturday evening at 6:30. It's also Purim. If you were here for a lot of the service, you saw Noah trying to type about Purim. Noah is 5. He spells the best that he can. If you saw his chats in there earlier tonight, he's very excited for Purim. So you can still sign up and bake or sponsor for Lifelong Learning's Hamantashathon. The Cantors and Friends concert is on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. We have our Purim Carnival drive-through Wednesday afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30. Costumes encouraged, masks on the bottom half of your face required, top of half of your face optional as long as you're not driving the driver. We have also on Wednesday is the Lou Malnati's fundraiser for lifelong learning. Order your pizza, tell them that it is part of our group, pick it up. It's that simple. You get to enjoy your pizza or whatever you want from Lou Malnati's. Thursday evening is our Purim Spiel and Megillah reading at 6:30. Scott Finch, the cantor, and the whole cast have been working so hard on this spiel. Please, please join us. Costumes, again, strongly encouraged. And then on Friday, next Friday, on Purim Day, Susan and I will be leading a lunch and learn at noon. So please do that. Costumes highly optional on that one. It's totally up to you. Next weekend, on Sunday, February 28th, Carrie Silverstein is giving a talk through the eyes of children about the kinder transport. And of course, we have continuing every Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, Women's Torah Study with Sherry Blumberg, and every Thursday at 12:30, Food for Our Soul, Parshat HaShavua with Susan Kasdan. All of the links and more information on everything and other events that I managed to skip is in a Manu email. And then the one other thing I want to make sure gets said, we sent out an email earlier today. If you are over 65 and therefore eligible for vaccination and you haven't been able to get one yet, we sent out an email earlier. Hyatt Pharmacy on the south side. On Layton, thank you, Andrew. On Layton is doing a walk-in clinic tomorrow. I am encouraging it, even though it is Shabbat, it is about life-saving measures and really health comes first. If you are still looking for a place to get one, drive down to Layton tomorrow during the day and you should be able, hopefully you will be able to get one. I know that they did a walk-in clinic yesterday as well, and even 10 minutes before they were closing, they still had doses available at that walk-in clinic. So by all means, get there if you need to and are eligible. Did I skip any announcements? Okay, fantastic. We are going to conclude our service. I believe our choir is going to be leading us.
בידו אף כדרוכי בעת אישן ועירה ואם רוחי גווייתי אדוני לי ולא יירא ואם רוחי גווייתי אדוני לי ולא יירא. My soul I give to you, my spirit in your care. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Hold me in your hand. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Save me in your hand.
Adonai oz le'amo yitain. May God grant strength to our people. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless our people always with peace.